This casual watching video is all about how to develop a homepage, how to work and use Bootstrap components, and even how to optimize those components to get a lean, well-optimized website. So this video is a casual watching video, which means you can chill on the couch, watch this video, and still learn a lot from Bootstrap and how to develop a website. I do share a lot of insight and a lot of tips and tricks that I've learned over the years as a developer, and this will definitely help you. So make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. I do post videos like this on a weekly, daily, and monthly basis. And by the way, I have another video where I designed this entire website from start to finish. Again, casual watching. You don't have to follow it step by step. You'll still learn a lot as you go through these videos. So with that, let's jump into it. Let me show you how to develop a homepage and specifically how to work with Bootstrap components coming up. All right, so now that the slide section is all done and it looks good, and when I say done, as always, I am referring to the point that we will get back to it, we will fine tune it and get it to perfection. But at this stage, it looks pretty good. We have a good base. And by the way, I've added the inspector inside of the browser itself. This just makes it a little easier for us to navigate between the code and the actual visual part of the website. The next part, the next thing we need to focus on is creating the Our Services section. Now, for simplicity reasons, and because I don't want this video to end up being 15,000 hours, we are going to simplify this a little bit. And by the way, in the comments, drop a comment if you want me to create a video on how to create the JavaScript component of this. And when I say JavaScript, I'm also referring to SCSS to create the component where this is more of an interactive layout. So what do I mean? Well, if you click on the arrows left and right, this can move, as well as on a touch or mobile or tablet, you can swipe left and right. So again, if you want me to create a video of that, drop the comments below and I can definitely do that. But for this specific section or for this video, we're going to focus on simplicity because we're still learning. So let's jump into it. The first thing I want to do is take all these icons and export it all at once. So with that said, click on the icon and detach it first. So we can see that this is an asset or a component of Figma. So we want to detach it. The same for others if they are, so the others are not. And the way you can see if it's an asset or a component versus a non-asset and component is the actual purple outline. Now you can see that it's blue because we detached it and the rest of them are also blue. So coming back to it, we're gonna take this icon and export it. Just before we export it, I wanna rename it, calling it spa icon. Next, want to do the same for changing room. Click on the icon and I'm going to call it change room. Next, we're going to do free lessons. So clicking on the icon group, on the left, we're going to call it free icon. Now we have the three icons renamed and now we can export it. So quick thing, I want to export them one by one. And the reason for that is because if you don't do it that way, Figma will actually put it in a zip folder and that's an extra step. If you have tons of things to export, for sure, then go ahead. But if it's one or two or three items, then just export it one by one. Clicking on the export, selecting SVG, because this kind of stuff, we definitely want SVG. And saving that, do the same for this one as well. Change room, click on export, SVG, click save, and the last one, spa area, export, SVG, brilliant. All right, the reason why I'm exporting the icons first, it just makes life a little easier. Now, navigating back to Visual Studio Code, we are going to start adding it. First things first, I'm navigating in the File Explorer, navigating to the top, get rid of this node modules or minimize it. I'm also going to close all of our open tabs, open up a new index.html, just so that we can clean everything out, right? It's a fresh start. Before we start coding, check in the code as always, completed sliders section. And when I say slider, it could be Euro section, whatever you like to call it. And I'm going to check it in. And we're going to make sure that our node is still running, which it is. Docker is still running. Everything is great. So we can start by creating our service section. First things first, go to the images and we want to add the icons that we just exported. So I am going to go do that right now. Grab my icons and drag it in. And when we look at dist, we'll see it automatically pushed it over there, which is good. By the way, if you've only joined the video or this specific video now, make sure to check out the other videos in the description below. I have the full video of all of this from start to finish, so make sure to check that out. I'll also have separate videos that would definitely save you some time so you don't need to go through the entire big video. All right, with that said, next, open up a section. So I'm typing out section and I'm just hitting tab. I will be adding PY6 and BG Light. Now with that done, I want to open up these tags and add another div, then add container, hit save, and add an H2. Now that we have an H2, I will navigate back to the Figma and just see, okay, it's just our services, which is pretty easy. Navigating back to VS, adding our services. Perfect. Now that we have that, we can go to the browser and have a quick look at what we have. Now that we have the browser, I'm going to hit refresh and we have our services. Oh, great. It's there, but it's not exactly what I want it to be, but it's a good base, right? We can see in the code itself, and when I scroll down or inspect element here, we can see that we've just created a P6, which is the correct spacing. We have BG Light, which I'm just going to close this. Just want to see if we can see. Yeah, you can see the different colors. I'm just going to zoom in there a little bit so you can see it. So there we can see the background color, but we still have a little bit of work to do here. First off, this looks way too small and it obviously needs to be center line. So with that said, let's navigate to Figma. I want to see what is the actual font size for this heading. Again, quick thing, this design is specifically designed for the Bootstrap framework. There is a video in the description, a full course video of how I explain to do it. And also this entire design and the development is on the Figma community and GitHub pages. So looking at this, we have a font size of 3.25. And from experience, I believe that is display 4. We can quickly go back and have a look, opening up node modules, looking for Bootstrap, SCSS, and opening up our variables, just hitting Control F and typing in display. And here we can see the font display sizes. Display 4 would work pretty good for what we are trying to achieve here. And again, as a developer, sometimes you need to make that decision to round everything off. I am going to go with the decision of going for display 4, opening up a class, typing in display 4, probably going to add a font weight regular, hit the save button, just quickly navigate to the browser, hit refresh, and let's see what we have. We have our services. It looks good at this stage. We still need to do a few things. So going back to Visual Studio Code, I am going to add a P tag, and I'm adding a P tag because of search engine optimization. And I'm just going to say this is the sub heading, hit save. Next, I want to put this in the column or row system. So cutting this, we're going to add a new div, open up a class, type in row, and within the row, opening up another div, opening up a class, saying call MD12, and dropping what we just created in there. Now, few things though, before we go back to the browser, I just want to say text center. And by the way, I've got a terrible keyboard, so that's why I'm constantly typing a bunch of random stuff. Now with that, I want to add a margin bottom 0 on the heading itself, because by default, heading and P tags and anything has a predefined margin bottom. And I don't want to go and change the actual variables of it. I'd much rather just do it in here, because in this instance, I don't want a margin bottom. So just going to use the actual classes itself and not modify the variables. Going back to the browser, we're going to hit refresh. And there we go. It looks pretty good. When I look at the actual design, we can see that it is centered. Now, one thing I'm going to add is text capitalize. Going back to Visual Studio Code, we just want to add text capitalize, hit save, go to the browser. Let's see how that looks like. That looks pretty good at this stage. We have something. You know what? It looks pretty thin to me. I just want to see how a 500 would look on this. So font weight 500. So let's just add font weight medium. Just want to see, might be too thick. Let's have a look. Yeah, that actually looks really good. That matches our design pretty well. When we look at the design is a little thin, but again, as a front-end developer, you need to be that bridging gap between what is designed and what is possible in development. All right, so now that we have the heading done, the next part is working on these boxes. So we've already imported the icons. The next step is starting to build out this green box. So I'm going to click on this title to have a look at what the font size is. The font size is 1.75. When I disable the dev, let's see what we use. So we used heading 3, and that's what we are going to use. Going to Visual Studio Code, we need to open up a new row, typing in div, we're gonna say row. And now I've opened the row system. Quickly going back to Figma, just zooming out here real quick. And with that, we want to add columns, and I want each box to be in its own column, probably the best step, the best route to go. And because we are keeping this simple and straightforward, when I click on this, I want to stick within the container itself. And that's what we did with Visual Studio Code. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes that we can basically create, which in a Bootstrap is going to be call 3, 6, 9, 12. Yeah, that's 4. So that's perfect. One thing I want to do here, and by the way, you can hold in Alt and you can click at multiple spots to modify your code at multiple areas. And essentially, I want to add MD because that's the breakpoint we're going to start with. Opening up the first column, first thing, we're going to open up a div again. And now going back to Figma, we want to start creating this green box. I'm going to start with the heading first. Again, we have heading H3 and it is bold and it's centered. Clicking on it, I want to copy the text. Go back to Visual Studio. I want to add an H3. Now notice that with front-end development, you always have to be aware of search engine optimization. You already have an H1, so you can only have one H1. In this entire section, I have an H2, so we can't have another H2 within this section. We want to make sure that we have one H2 per section. Now, that's not technically or theoretically the rule of the law, but that's how I do it. That's how I kind of keep my code neat and make sure that I understand it properly, because that is so important when it comes to development. You always want to make sure that everything is nicely stacked and neat. Now, within this, we have one H2, and you can have multiple H3s. You can have multiple H4s. We're going to start with a bunch of H3s. So again, we're going to paste what we copied in Figma itself. I am going to hit save. Clicking on H3, I'm adding a class. And with that, I'm probably going to add an MB3 to start off with. Also adding font weight bold. Perfect. Hit save. Navigate over to the browser. Let's see what we have. We have this right here. The next steps, we need to start building out that beautiful box that we are working in. Opening up a class here. I want to add BG primary as the background color, as well as rounded, probably rounded 3. And padding on the y-axis, go for 4. And on the x-axis, go for 3. Again, you got to go back and forth to see how that looks like. That looks good. Probably going to change the padding to be P4 across the board. And with that, probably going to say text white. Let's hit save and have a look at how that looks like. That looks okay. It's getting there. Just want to inspect element and see. Okay, we said text white, but we didn't say text center. I was like, why is that thing not centered? Okay, so we're going to say text center. And let's have a quick look and see how that looks like. All right, getting there. It's a little thick, to be honest, but we will fine tune it going back. Yeah, it's too thick. So let's go to Visual Studio Code and change this bold to perhaps medium. Now, while we add it and while we are in the design, I'm just going to quickly copy the paragraph. We're going to drop that in here. Now, with that, we want to add MB3 below. Going to hit save. Let's quickly go to the browser, have a look at how that looks like. Yeah, so the weight looks much better. The paragraph looks good at this stage. Next, we need to add the button. Copying the text here, go to Visual Studio Code and add a button. And when I say button, it is going to be a link, of course. We are using static pages here. Don't want to use a button. We're going to open up a class. We're going to say BTN primary, and that should be good for now. Probably need to come back and change that again. Let's hit refresh. Yeah, we need to change that for sure. So let's have a look at Figma. I just want to see it's a white button. Do we have a shadow on this beautiful button? We don't. It kind of looks like we have a shadow, but probably not. Okay, back to Visual Studio Code. We want to go not for button primary, but let's go for button light. Hit save. Let's see how that looks like in the browser. That looks good. That looks good. Just want to match it up. The text I can see here is the primary color. I just want to change that by adding text primary. All right, so now at this stage, we have created our box. Now we need to work on the spacing because obviously this is super tight at this stage. Going to Figma and opening up Figma again, let's have a look at what the spacing says. So I can see we have 35 pixels between each item and 45 at the end. And we have 96. So 96 is going to be a spacing of 6. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and just quickly adjust this. In the box itself, we're going to change this P4. We're going to change it to PY6 and PX5. And then we're going to change this MB3 to MB5 and the same with that one. Actually, let's change this one to 4. That will match the design closely. Go back to the browser, hit refresh, and yeah, no, that doesn't look good at all. We need to fine tune it a little bit. First off, let's get rid of that padding on the left and right or the x-axis. So let's just change it to 4. And we probably want to change this to 4 as well. And I want to make sure that there's no padding on the button itself. So adding MB0, go back to the browser. Now we're getting closer. We still have this huge space at the top and bottom. It's a little too much for me. Going to Figma, I can see that we used 96, but for some reason, this is not matching what we have. And I think the reason for that is because of the column structure that we have, because in Figma, we had a different type of column structure here. So we got to tweak it. And again, that's the thing about a developer is you have to have the ability to make changes on the fly. Okay, quickly, just quick, look at the browser. We're going to decrease this spacing, also decrease this, but increase this spacing here. Go to VS Code. The first thing is changing PY6, let's change that to PY5. And let's change this one, the actual paragraph. Let's change that to MB5. So with these changes, MB5, actually, let's change it to MB4. Hit save. Let's navigate over to that beautiful browser of ours. Yeah, that looks much better. We are almost there. I just feel like this space should be more. So let's inspect element and let's do it here for a change. So let's change MB4 to MB5. That looks okay. Let's change this one to 5. I just want to see how that looks like if we change MB4 to MB5. You see, that is way too much. Just want to see how it looks like if we change it to 3. That doesn't look bad. And with that change to 3, let's change this one to 4. Yeah, that one just does not want to play ball at all today. Okay, let's change that to 4. And let's change it to 5. I just want to see that one last time. I just feel like this space is too much when we change it to 5. So let's stick with 4 for now. So with that, let's go back to Visual Studio Code and just adjust what we just created. So on the P tag, we have MB4. Let's change this to MB3. And yeah, that should be good. That is our base. Again, we're probably going to change this as we go along. So now we have our first box. Let's go and create the rest of the boxes. And as we adding the rest of the boxes, as I said, we're probably going to change this one because it's going to give us more clarity as we put the rest of the boxes together. Now, a quick thing before we continue, before we go on, let's add a MB for our heading structure because this is right at the top against the subheading right there. Navigate to VS Code. And with the P tag here, let's add a MB5, hit save. Navigate over to the browser, and there we have our space. Okay, with this box done, let's go and add the rest of them. Navigate back to Visual Code or VS Code. We're going to reuse what we already created. So I'm going to take this and copy it and paste it in. With that done, we're going to change the BG primary. We're going to change that to white. I'm going to remove this text white, hit save. Let's navigate back to Figma just to make sure what we need to do. So we need to add these icons and we need to add these headings. So starting with the heading, I'm going to copy spa area and paste that in so that we have that there. With that, copy this again, paste it in, go back to Figma and copy changing room. Now, of course, you can do this however you like. I feel like this is easier for me. If you find a different way of doing this that would save you time or feel that it's better for you, go ahead and absolutely do that. I am just going to copy this one as well. I'm going to use a special feature of Windows where you can hit the Windows key and V and paste in what you had in your clipboard. Hitting save, I know that we are not even close to where we're supposed to be with this, but I just want to see where we're at with it. Hitting refresh, we can see, okay, we have spa area, changing room, and free lessons. Good, good, good. Now, with that done, let's add the icons. So clicking on this specific column right here, I'm going to type in IMG and hit tab. In the SRC, we're going to click on IMG and look for that icon. Now remember, we dropped the icon earlier. I want to add spa icon SVG, add an alt text. Let's add spa icon. Again, this is not the proper SEO optimized way of doing this. We are just adding spa icon for demonstration purposes. I just want to see what is the width and height of these icons. So it looks like it's 80 by 80. We are going to go for that. But because we have different widths and heights of these icons, we are only going to focus on the height and not the width itself. Going back to Visual Studio Code, we want to go and add a width. We want to say 100% and add a height and go for ATPX because they don't have a consistent height structure. I also want to add a class and let's add MB4. Let's hit save and see how that looks like. There we have our spa icon. Looks good so far. So far, it looks really good. Go back to Visual Studio Code. Let's do the rest. So I'll literally just copy what you have there. Go to the other column. We drop it in. We change the IMG and we're going to change it to change room. There we go. And I'm just going to say changing room icon and hit save. Let's navigate to the browser, just a quick peek and see how that looks like. That looks pretty good at this point. We can also see that the boxes are a consistent height as well. So far, so good. All right, back to VS Code, not Figma, but VS Code. And we are going to copy this IMG as well and drop it in the last one there. And on top of that, we need to go change the IMG and we are changing this one to free icon. Hit save and we need to change this alt. I am just navigating back to Figma here real quick. Just want to see, let's call it free lessons. Let's add the alt text as free lessons. So navigating and we're going to change this to free lessons icons. Again, I know I sound like a broken record, but this is super important for SEO purposes. You're not going to use that type of alt text. You always have to do your research and make sure it is 110%. Otherwise, you're not going to get an optimized website. All right, moving on. We have a base structure here. Base structure looks okay. One thing I want to change though is the roundness. The roundness is not round enough. If we go to Figma and we have a look at the design, you're going to notice that this roundness is way more than what is anticipated or what is by default. And the default that we used was rounded 3. The rounded we're looking for is 30px. Navigate back to VS Code. We would need to go change a variable for that. Clicking on the variable tab that we have open, hit Control F and search for radius. So when you find that, you're going to scroll down and you'll see the radius here located perfectly. Now, what we want to change is the actual radius. We want to change how much the radius is going to be. Now, by default, large, extra large, and XXL is 0.5, 1, and 2 rem. Let's take LG. Copy it, which I believe is rounded 3, by the way, and add it. Move down all these node modules. I'm just going to minimize this node modules. Move to the custom vars, and right here, adding radius settings, and drop that in. Get rid of the default as per usual. Navigate back to Figma. We want to check the actual RM of this. Let's have a look. It says border radius 1.85. Let's navigate back to VS Code and change this to 1.85 rem. Perfect. I just want to see if we have something that, we don't have something that's close to it. Now that we've done that, we will hit save, go back to index, and we will change this rounded 3 to rounded LG. Hit save. We just want to test one for now and refresh on that just to see how that would look like. And there we go. So what happened here is a rounded LG works and rounded 3, which is actually rounded LG. Both of them works. The next thing we need to do is fine tune these boxes and also fine tune the actual buttons itself. Navigating back to VS Code, let's do a few changes so that we can match the design as close as possible. At the very first column, the very first one where we have BG primary, I want to change that PY back to PY6. On top of that, a row by default is always a deflex, which means that we can say align item center. And when we do that, we can hit save and navigate to the browser. When we're at the browser, we're just going to hit refresh, and we are already seeing that effect that we have in the design itself. The only thing is that when you look at the spacing between the green box and the white box, this is more than what we have, which means we got to go back to VS Studio. And one thing I want to change in VS Studio is the actual PY. So let's change this PY5 to PY4. And because we're changing that to PY4, we might as well just use P4 for the rest of them. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it so that we have a PY for all of them, that we don't have PX and PY, but we have PY across the board. Navigating back to the browser, hit refresh, and that looks okay. That looks good. A few modifications that I would definitely want to do, because if we look at the Figma design, we can see actually that looks really good. That looks close to what we want. One thing I do want to add though is increase. Let's go back to the browser. I just want to show you something real cool. One thing I want to add is a little bit more padding overall so that these boxes are a slightly bit thinner. So navigating back to VS Code, we need to add a PX. So in call free, we're only going to do it in the middle 2 columns and not the first and the last. But in the middle columns, we're going to go PX LG because the breakpoint should only be on the actual tablet and nothing else. And we're going to start with PX3 and see how that looks like. I think you've realized now that with development, I don't want to add it there, by the way. With development, it's all about back and forth constantly. You have to play around, test it, see how it looks like until you get to a point where it looks really good. That is what a front-end developer is all about. So you could see that we have a little bit more spacing, but I want to change that. I want to actually increase it to 4. So let's go and change that. Let's increase that. So we have PXLG3. Let's change that to PXLG4 on those 2 columns. Hit save, navigate over to the browser. There we go. That looks pretty good. I have a good spacing here. We have good spacing here at the top as well. This overall looks really good. So let's work on that buttons real quick. Let's make those buttons look the way it's supposed to. Going to the design, what we have here is a much smaller button and it says learn more and we have an outline only. Going to VS Code, we need to modify these buttons. Let's start with one and see how we go with it. I'm going to use the last one just as an example. We are going to get rid of button light and add button outline primary and border. Let's try border 2 and see how that works. So essentially what I did is I said button outline primary, which means it's going to be a button that's outlined with the primary color, and border 2. Navigate back to the browser, hit refresh, and let's see how that looks like. That looks good. Just want to add learn more so it's closely aligned to the actual design that we have. Navigate to the browser, hit refresh, And that looks okay. We might want to try button SM, see how that looks like. So instead of using button or adding button SM to it, hit save, refresh, and that is a little small for my taste. Going back to it, we're going to modify the variables just for button small. Search for button. We want to change the variables for button SM. We will be using button SM throughout the development, throughout the design, so we might as well go and change this. Copy it, go to our button settings and drop it in right here. Get rid of the default. When we get rid of this, navigate over to Figma. We want to see what's the actual width and height of this. We want to activate development mode, and we have 1 rem on X and 6.2 on Y. Going back to this part, 1 rem on X and 0.65 on Y. Let's hit save. Make sure that it successfully converts everything. Go to the browser and hit refresh. That looks good. That looks good. Just 1 or 2 final tweaks that I want to do to that button. Perhaps let's see if we can change the radius of the button small. If not, we're probably going to need to use a class. So button border radius, we do have right here, radius, perfect. Let's go back to that part, scroll up to where our buttons were, and I think that's right there. Yes, it is. We're going to drop that in. Let's go to Figma real quick and just double check what is the radius on this button itself. We do have a radius of 0.625. Let's navigate to code here and add that in. Hit save. And once we've hit save, let's navigate over to the browser and hit refresh. We have the roundness. Last thing before we move on. Sorry, I'm very particular when it comes to development. Make sure everything is 110%. I just want to add a font weight medium to this and see how that looks like. Perhaps that might look really good. That doesn't look good at all. That doesn't look at, we've changed anything. Okay, let's change it to semi-bold. Perfect. Go to the browser, refresh. Still nothing. Even semi-bold, even medium. Let's go last resort. Let's go and add bold. Okay, save. Let's refresh. That looks good. That is exactly what I'm looking for. We have learn more here. So let's go and apply that to the rest of our buttons. So all we're going to do is copy this right here and paste it in with the rest of them, but not the first one, because obviously we don't want the first one to look like that. Let's navigate over to the browser and see how that looks like. We have beautiful looking spa area changing rooms, free lessons. And overall, when we look at Figma, that looks pretty good. One thing I want to double check though is the heading. I just want to make sure this is also an H3. And there we go. That's actually an H4 and not an H3. So going back to Visual Studio Code, we just want to change that real quick. One thing you can do is we don't want to change this to actually say H4. We can modify this by just literally going FS4 for font size 4, which is heading 4. And adding that to the rest of our, and let's navigate to our browser, and there we go. That looks really, really, really good. But we still got to do one more thing before we finish this off, or two more things that we need to do before we wrap up this section. And that is adding the shadow and changing the font weight on these headings. Let's go to VS Code and let's do that real quick. With the headings itself, we have font weight medium, which with the first column, it worked really great. But the rest of them, we need to change them to bold so it reflects our design. I am just going to take that and copy and paste it right here. Now we got to go grab that shadow. Going to Figma, we want to grab this custom shadow that we designed in the previous video. And by the way, if you haven't heard of this, or if you only joined the video now, make sure to check out the other video where we are designing this from scratch. All right, let's go and select this box right there. And you'll see on the right-hand side, we have a bunch of shadows that we would need to copy. Opening up dev mode, we are going to look for box shadow. I'm going to copy this, and that's a long shadow. That's true. That's a super long shadow. Now, there's only two ways to achieve this. You can either go and modify the variables folder for shadow LG. So let's go and do that. Open up the variables folder and look for shadow. One thing you want to do is hit Control Home first and then go back to your search, because one thing we need to do is make sure that shadows are enabled, and it isn't enabled by default. So we first need to go and enable that. Go back to custom var. Let's go and add that. We are adding that to the MISC. So just searching for MISC right here. Paste that in, type in true, and hit save. Now that that's activated, we are searching for shadow, and I'm going to modify shadow LG. Copy box shadow LG, go back to custom vars. I am going to add a separate one, and I'm going to call it shadow. I cannot type out with this beautiful keyboard. I think I need a new keyboard for that matter. Box shadow LG, and let's paste that box shadow that we've copied from Figma. Now, one thing we just got to get rid of is the box shadow that it comes with, and everything looks good. So I am hitting Control S to save this, wait for this to compile, and it has compiled successfully. Once that's done, let's go back to our big box and let's add that beautiful looking shadow that we have in BG primary. All we're going to do here is go shadow LG, not LD, not LF, LG. Oh boy. Navigating to the browser here, hitting refresh, scrolling down, and we have our beautiful shadow here. We also have our thickness. So we have our beautiful thickness as well on those headings. Now, in the next section of this video, in the next video, we are going to focus on, when we go back to Figma here, we are going to focus on adding this beautiful wave. I'm going to show you how to do it in the SVG way, as well as adding the latest classes. And that's going to include a Bootstrap tab system as well. Now, with that all said, make sure to stay tuned. If you're on the big video, make sure to stay tuned. That is up next, the next chapter. If you're on a single video, make sure to check out the full video. Make sure to check out all the resources. And while you are checking out everything, make sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I would truly appreciate that. Now with that, let's move on to the next section.